Midnight Intruder, the truth behind his madness. The chime of midnight had just faded when a faint scratching sound came from the security door. Paloma sat on the sofa, twirling a fruit knife in her hand, its blade glinting coldly under the moonlight. She should have grown accustomed to these uninvited intrusions, just as she'd grown used to the repeatedly scabbing scars on her neck, each etched with the same man's name, Cale Walker. The lock clicked open. A tall figure leaned against the doorframe, the hem of his black trench coat brushing the threshold, as he twirled a dagger nimbly in his hand. "How do you want to die?" His voice was deep and hoarse, feigning ferocity, but the faint flush on the tips of his ears betrayed him. Paloma lifted her eyes, rising calmly to close in on him. When they were less than half a meter apart, the man's breath hitched, the dagger clattered to the floor, and his Adam's apple bobbed violently. "What are you doing?" His voice trembled almost imperceptibly. She reached out, waving her hand gently in front of his eyes, her fingertips brushing his cool cheek. "Mr. Hitman, don't you remember me?" She tilted her neck slightly, revealing several scars of varying depths. "These are souvenirs from your last mission." The man's pupils contracted sharply. He suddenly pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it felt like he might crush her, his voice choked with suppressed sobs. "I'm back. I came back for you." Paloma sighed softly, patting his back lightly, her tone as casual as discussing the weather. "Who's the client this time?" "A man." He paused, resting his chin on top of her head, his voice cautious. "A very tall man." "And the reason for killing me?" His arms tightened abruptly, his voice laced with a hint of pleading. "Because I like you." "What nonsense is that?" Paloma pushed him back by his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. The man before her had a cold, handsome face with high cheekbones, but his eyes were filled with unfathomable sorrow. Head bowed, he looked like a child who'd done something wrong. She raised an eyebrow in exasperation. "Don't tell me the client is you again, Mr. Hitman." If she hadn't experienced it herself, she'd never have believed that this handsome man, who always broke in pretending to be a hitman, exuding an air of detachment, was actually a psychiatric patient with intermittent amnesia. The memory of their first encounter still sent chills down her spine. She'd just returned home from work when a cold voice sounded behind her. "Don't move." The glint of a dagger pressed against her neck, its sharp tip pricking her skin, and freezing her in place. The man kicked the door shut, forcing her at knife point to the living room, where he tied her to a chair. He sank into the sofa, his pitch-black eyes fixed on her intently, as he twirled the dagger so fast it blurred. "I'm sorry, Miss Thorne." His tone was flat, devoid of any real remorse. "I'm a hitman. I've been ordered to kill you." Paloma's heart raced. She racked her brain, recalling her recent life, promotion, raise, a new car, a stable relationship with her boyfriend. She couldn't fathom who would want her dead. "May I ask who the client is? Why do you want to kill me?" "No," he refused outright. "Can I call my boyfriend before I die? Maybe report to the police too?" "No," he hesitated, then added, "but you can tell me what to say, and I'll pass it on." Paloma refused immediately. She couldn't risk dragging her boyfriend into danger. Watching the man stand and approach, the dagger glinting in his hand, she suddenly felt a strange calm. Death didn't seem so terrifying after all. She tilted her head back, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Hitman, one last request." "Speak," he said impatiently. "I'm 24 years old. I have a boyfriend, but he's never kissed me." Her eyes wandered over his handsome features, her tone playful. "So I want to know what it feels like to kiss someone before I die. Is that too much to ask?" She'd expected the unreasonable request to be rejected, but after a moment's silence the man nodded. When he leaned down to kiss her, Paloma's eyes widened in surprise. For someone who looked so tough, he kissed clumsily, pecking at her lips like a woodpecker, gentle and cautious, his ears turning bright red instantly. A mischievous thought crossed her mind. She bit down lightly on his lower lip, slowly prying open his jaws. The man panicked, pushing her away breathlessly, his cheeks flushed with anger. "You said you had no experience." "Oh, maybe I'm a natural," she teased, raising an eyebrow. The man narrowed his eyes, his anger flaring. He stabbed the dagger toward her. Paloma closed her eyes, tilting her head back, waiting for the searing pain, but all she heard was the sound of rope snapping. He'd regained his composure, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. He dropped a final line, "Don't be a homewrecker again," then vanished without a trace. Later, the police informed her that the self-proclaimed hitman was an escaped psychiatric patient named Cale Walker. Paloma's relief was short-lived. He returned the very next night. "Don't move." The familiar line echoed, and the sharp sting of a blade pressed against her neck once more. Tied to the chair, Paloma noticed a strange hostility in his eyes. "Mr. Hitman, don't you remember me?" She tried to jog his memory. The man scoffed, his voice deep and cold. "Of course I do," he enunciated each word slowly. "You tried to hurt my girlfriend." "How could I forget?" Paloma thought quickly, playing along. "Mr. Hitman, it's a misunderstanding. We're filming a movie, remember?" The man frowned, as if struggling to recall. Paloma pressed her advantage. "It's just acting, all fake, doesn't count." "Is that so?" His eyes were dark and piercing, sending shivers down her spine. "But he's dead. He needs someone to accompany him underground." He raised the dagger, its tip pointing directly at her heart. "So you'll have to die with him. After I kill you, I'll kill myself." "Kill me then, but you don't have to die," Paloma said defiantly, lifting her chin. "It's all because I love you too much. I'd do anything to keep you by my side, but you still fell for him." His eyes were pitch black, giving away no emotion. Paloma immediately switched to her dramatic mode, her voice filled with grief. "The childhood sweetheart can never compare to the sudden stranger. All those promises of marriage, were they just drunken nonsense?" She squeezed out a few tears. The man stared at her for a long time, before finally disappearing into the night. After that, Paloma changed the door lock, kept several knives at home, and specifically told the police and psychiatric hospital to keep a close eye on Cale. But her peaceful days didn't last long. He appeared again, this time with a dagger pressed to her boyfriend's neck, while she was trapped in his arms. "This is the new man you like?" His breath brushed her ear, burning with anger. Paloma was about to step in when her boyfriend suddenly dropped to his knees, his voice trembling. "It's not my fault. She seduced me first, all her fault." He even turned around, rummaging out all the knives Paloma had hidden, and offering them to Cale before scrambling away without a second glance. Paloma stood frozen, a sharp pain twisting in her chest. The love she'd thought so strong had crumbled so easily in the face of death. The sound of the dagger hitting the floor jolted her back to her senses. Cale's anger faded, and he looked at her with eager eyes, his voice tinged with a hint of pride. "How did I do? You remember again?" Paloma blinked, realization dawning. He probably had selective amnesia, remembering only the part where she'd kissed him. "You kissed me, but you're with someone else." "That's not right." His gaze was resentful, like a wronged child. To avoid angering him, Paloma smoothed his ruffled feathers. "Don't worry, he's just a passing acquaintance. I only love you." The next day, Paloma broke up with her boyfriend without hesitation. Before blocking him, she sent a final message. "This psychopath you're talking about is taller than you, a better kisser, and far more responsible." Watching his frantic replies flood her phone, she smiled. Finally, peace and quiet. Before she knew it, she'd grown accustomed to Cale's intrusions. Sometimes he was lucid, sometimes delusional. When lucid, he'd show his affection clumsily. When delusional, he'd pretend to be a hitman threatening her, but he never truly hurt her. She'd learned his quirks. This over 6-foot-tall man had a sweet tooth for strawberry cake. Despite his sharp, vigilant eyes, he'd blush fiercely and lose his composure whenever she got close. Their relationship had become ambiguous, neither normal lovers nor mere intruder and victim. Paloma would leave the door unlocked for him, pick up a strawberry cake on her way home from work, while Cale would stand guard outside her building on nights she worked overtime, then fumble to cut her an orange once she returned. That was until the day she spotted Cale in a psychiatric hospital gown, meeting a man in a hat. The man handed him a change of clothes and a dagger, and beneath the hat, Paloma recognized her ex-boyfriend's face. Her heart plummeted to her stomach, and the strawberry cake in her hand nearly slipped. So this had all been a trick. She'd been played for a fool by two men. Back home, she collapsed onto the bed, her body trembling uncontrollably. After what felt like an eternity, the door lock turned and Cale walked in. He'd showered and changed into clean clothes, smelling of his familiar fresh scent, but to Paloma, he felt utterly foreign. "Paloma, what's wrong?" He sensed her unease, reaching out to turn her around, his voice anxious. Paloma couldn't hold back any longer, she burst into tears. Once she'd cried herself out, she opened the cake and ate ravenously until her stomach churned. She looked up at Cale, who was kneeling before her, apologizing repeatedly, his hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, his usual cold elegance nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Hitman, what kind of game are you playing with my ex-boyfriend?" Her voice was bitter with self-mockery. "Just want to see how far you can toy with a woman. Are you brothers or a criminal gang?" Cale shook his head frantically, repeating, "No, I don't know anyone else. I only know you. Paloma, don't send me away." Looking at his terrified, pleading face, Paloma's heart ached like it was being cut. She knew he was mentally ill, but she couldn't help feeling sorry for him. Yet the pain of betrayal was too sharp. She waved her hand wearily, "Leave. The game's over. I give up, I'm tired." That sentence shattered his last line of defense. The light in Cale's eyes vanished instantly, leaving him looking like an empty shell. He stumbled out of the house. After he left, Paloma crumpled to the floor, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she had to admit, she'd fallen in love with this self-proclaimed hitman, this psychiatric patient. In the days that followed, Cale never appeared again. Her ex-boyfriend vanished without a trace too. Paloma began to suffer from insomnia, dreaming of Cale night after night. He'd be wearing a black suit, walking through a crowd toward her, dropping to one knee, holding out a pink diamond ring, and asking softly, "Paloma, will you marry me?" Every time she woke, her pillow was soaked with tears. She couldn't resist driving to the psychiatric hospital, desperate to confirm the name haunting her dreams. "Excuse me, do you have a patient named Cale Walker here?" The nurse glanced up at her, her tone flat. "Mr. Walker? He's dead." Paloma felt as if struck by lightning, her body trembling violently. Could there be a mistake? "May I see a photo?" The nurse's attitude suddenly changed. "You're Ms. Paloma, aren't you? Someone came to collect Mr. Walker's body this morning. He said you'd know who he is." Following the address the nurse provided, Paloma found the meeting place her ex-boyfriend had specified. In the middle of the room, inside a freezer, Cale lay peacefully, with several scars on his neck identical to hers. "He killed himself," her ex-boyfriend leaned against the wall, smoking one cigarette after another. "Mr. Walker had a history of episodic suicidal tendencies. Even without you, he'd hurt himself from time to time. But the time he spent with you, those were some of his rare happy moments." Her ex-boyfriend told her his real name was Evan Reed, Cale's assistant, who'd grown up with him. He'd helped Cale escape the psychiatric hospital because Cale had begged him, in his lucid moments, to see Paloma one last time. And those so-called hitman missions? They were all Cale's delusional reenactments when he lost his sanity. After Mr. Walker went crazy, he barely recognized anyone. Evan's voice was filled with sorrow, "But when I took him out for a walk, he saw you at a glance. He said, 'I think I know this person, but I can't remember who she is.' Ms. Paloma, do you really not remember him at all?" Evan's words were like a key, unlocking Paloma's sealed memories. They had known each other once, had been lovers, deeply and passionately. Cale had been a child prodigy, representing his family in international negotiations, at just 11 years old. But after meeting her, he'd shed all his coldness and pretense. He'd change clothes a dozen times before a date with her. He'd fumble in the kitchen wearing an apron, trying to make her favorite strawberry cake. He'd get down on one knee and propose to her in front of a crowd. But an accident changed everything. She'd fallen down a flight of stairs. When she woke up, she'd lost all memory of Cale, and even developed a strong fear of him. Cale had searched for the best doctors across Europe and America, but nothing could restore her memories. Watching her shrink away from him, he'd been overcome with agony, eventually suffering a mental breakdown, diagnosed with intermittent amnesia and depression, plagued by hallucinations and self-harm. After being admitted to the psychiatric hospital, his only obsession was her. In his lucid moments, he'd beg Evan to take him to see her. In his delusions, he'd pretend to be a hitman, an extreme way to get close to her, because he knew it was the only way she wouldn't push him away. He said even if you didn't remember him, just being able to see you from afar was enough. Evan's voice choked up. In his last lucid moment, he asked me to take him to the psychiatric hospital in your city. He said if you were married, he didn't want to disturb you, if not, he asked me to take good care of you. He wanted you to be happy, even if that happiness didn't include him. Paloma's world crumbled around her. All the little details she'd overlooked, all his absurd actions, suddenly they made sense. When he'd said, "Don't be a homewrecker again," it was because his own mother had been a mistress, and he knew the pain all too well. The scars on his neck were his way of sharing her suffering. His repeated, hitman persona, was his desperate struggle to get close, fearing rejection. After Cale's funeral, Evan invited Paloma to his home. When she opened the door, Evan was wearing an apron, carrying a strawberry cake from the kitchen, exactly like the ones Cale used to make. "Mr. Walker taught me how to make this," Evan said softly. "He said if you ever remembered him, seeing a strawberry cake would remind you that he'd loved you deeply." Paloma took a bite of the cake, and tears streamed down her face again. It tasted just like she remembered, sweet with a hint of bitterness, just like their love. Evan handed her a red box, left behind by Cale. Inside were a pair of wedding rings, and a note with neat, slightly trembling handwriting. "To my dearest Paloma. I'm sorry for breaking into your life again in such an unkind way. When I came to my senses, I realized I'd hurt you. I waited at your house for 2 whole days, but you never came back. Just as I was about to go look for you, you appeared. Under the light, there was a flash of surprise in your eyes, but your words shattered me. Mr. Hitman, didn't you poison it? So that surprise wasn't because you'd remembered me. Paloma, I know you too well. Even with that wariness in your eyes, I could tell you'd grown feelings for this hitman of mine. Looking at the scars on your neck, I hesitated, but only for a moment. I could lose my sanity again at any time, and as a hitman, I might hurt you. So let this be the last time I'm with you." Asking to go shopping in the middle of the night sounded insane. Yet despite your reluctant words, you still pulled me around everywhere, clutching my hand extra tightly. The moment I stepped out of your sight, you'd frown, tug at my clothes, and say sharply, "Mr. Hitman, you'd better protect me." My heart sank, a twinge of annoyance creeping in. I never thought I'd end up being jealous of myself. As dawn broke, I held you for a long time. I didn't know when I'd be sober again, maybe tomorrow, maybe never. I planned to leave this city for good, so I'd never hurt you again. Walking through the crowds, I seemed to see you everywhere, you in a white dress, you tying my tie, you pulling me toward the amusement park. You're everywhere, Paloma. I'll never be lonely again. I've lived 2 lives in this one lifetime, and in both, I fell in love with you. I consider myself lucky. Running her fingers over the words on the note, Paloma's hands trembled uncontrollably. A splitting headache hit her, and a tidal wave of forgotten memories flooded in. The way he proposed to her in the sunlight, his haggard figure by her hospital bed, his lonely gaze at the airport. She'd never forgotten him, she'd just hidden him deep in the darkest corner of her memory. "Cale, I remember now," she sobbed uncontrollably, "I found you again, so why didn't you wait for me?" Before leaving, Paloma went to the cemetery and placed one of the rings on his grave. She stroked his name carved into the tombstone gently, whispering, "Fool. In the end, you never left this city, but you left me." She slipped the other ring onto her finger and drove to every place they'd ever been: the cafe where they'd had their first date, the restaurant where he'd proposed, the amusement park they'd wandered together. At each spot, she pulled out the note and read it aloud softly to him. The ring glimmered with faint light in the sun, the intertwined thorn patterns on the platinum band gleaming coldly, just like their entanglement spanning 7 years. Those thorns hidden beneath the roses, the tenderness that grew mixed with scabs of blood, were now frozen forever in this wedding ring tinged with the smell of gun smoke.